Welcome to NovaDigest, where today's complex global events become clear, balanced, and engaging. Subscribe and transform how you understand the world. Today's news is about a surprising turn of events. The prospect of renewed tariffs under former President Trump's trade agenda is sending ripples through the clean energy sector. Critics argue these tariffs, intended to shield domestic industries from foreign competition, risk discouraging vital investments in U.S. renewables. Optimists, however, point to a history of resilience in clean energy markets, casting doubt on how dramatically any single policy can derail global momentum. Beneath the headlines is a complex story of shifting capital flows, corporate lobbying, geopolitical rivalries, and the unresolved question of whether trade protectionism aligns with long-term climate goals. A potential shift in investor sentiment. Central to the debate is the fear that new or expanded tariffs will raise the cost of importing solar panels, wind turbine components, and other clean tech into the United States. By making projects more expensive, such measures could prompt renewable energy investors to look elsewhere, particularly to Europe and Asia. The U.S. has long been a significant market for renewables, buoyed in recent years by policies such as the Inflation Reduction Act's subsidies and tax credits. Yet if tariffs substantially erode profit margins, capital-intensive projects could stall. This speculation rests on the assumption that investors are highly sensitive to trade barriers and that the U.S. remains indispensable for their returns. Opponents of the proposed tariffs warn of a domino effect. As financing retreats from American shores, domestic solar, wind, and battery manufacturing could lose momentum. As a corollary, global competitors, especially the European Union and China, could capitalize on the vacuum by attracting project developers and investors seeking stable regulatory environments. Historical lessons: tariffs versus growth. Tariffs targeting Chinese solar panels have cycled in and out of U.S. policy since 2012. Over that period, the U.S. solar industry has shown remarkable adaptability. A 2023 Rhodium Group study found that installations continued to rise even under tariff conditions, as developers turned to alternative suppliers or absorbed higher costs until prices normalized. This resilience suggests that trade barriers do not automatically halt renewable growth. Critics of the new tariffs say this time could be different due to intensifying geopolitical tensions, but the data underscore a fundamental truth: tariffs alone are rarely decisive in shaping the broader clean energy landscape. The China factor and supply chain realities. China dominates much of the global renewable energy supply chain, especially for solar panels, batteries, and critical minerals essential to clean tech. Even if U.S. tariffs make Chinese imports more costly, project developers still depend on these components, given limited alternative sources. On the surface, restricting Chinese imports might boost domestic manufacturing or encourage new supply chains in places like Southeast Asia. However, transitioning away from established manufacturing hubs requires major capital outlays and time, both of which could jeopardize short-term U.S. climate targets. Meanwhile, China's stranglehold on critical minerals, highlighted in multiple Brookings Institution and International Energy Agency reports, continues to pose a strategic vulnerability for any nation that relies on advanced renewable technologies. Any policy designed to cut ties with Chinese suppliers has to grapple with these deeper supply chain dependencies, which one round of tariffs is unlikely to resolve. Europe and the zero-sum fallacy. The notion that Europe stands ready to exploit a U.S. policy misstep and race ahead in the clean energy transition oversimplifies the EU's internal challenges. The EU has introduced the Green Deal Industrial Plan and other incentives, but implementation can be slowed by bureaucratic hurdles and disagreements among member states. Subsidy disputes, lengthy permitting processes, and reliance on imported components, often from China, all complicate Europe's dream of swiftly eclipsing U.S. leadership in renewables. At the same time, energy stakeholders in the EU are aware that any slowdown in the United States might present opportunities. More European consortiums could receive capital from investors discouraged by American trade policy. Even so, the global push for renewables is not necessarily a zero-sum game. European success can coexist with a robust U.S. clean energy sector if overall demand for green solutions continues rising worldwide. Corporate lobbying and policy incoherence. Tariffs often reflect the political influence of industries that stand to benefit from shielding their products from foreign competition, such as steel or aluminum producers. Renewables, however, do not always wield comparable lobbying power. According to disclosures from advocacy organizations like Open Secrets, firms benefiting from conventional energy or heavy manufacturing have historically influenced trade policy to their advantage. As a result, the alignment between trade priorities and climate goals can be tenuous. Where tensions become evident is in the contradiction between the U.S. push for energy independence, championed by both major parties, and the tariffs that may raise the cost of domestic renewables. Even some traditional energy advocates concede that obstructing a homegrown clean energy sector risks ceding technological leadership and economic growth to rival nations. Resilience and risks, beyond alarmism. While some commentators paint a dire scenario of wholesale investor flight from U.S. renewables, others cite the resilience of capital flows in the face of past policy changes. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Yes, heightened tariffs can dampen near-term enthusiasm, disrupt supply chains, and inflate development costs. But the long-term trajectory of clean energy investment also depends on broader economic forces, including fossil fuel volatility, consumer demand for sustainable energy, and local policy measures such as state-level renewable portfolio standards. Nevertheless, the confluence of trade barriers, geopolitical tensions, and climate imperatives poses a genuine risk. Slowing renewable deployment in the U.S. at this juncture could undermine global efforts to keep warming below internationally agreed-upon thresholds. It would also risk sidelining America's own industrial and climate ambitions, given how quickly other regions are forging ahead. What to watch and why it matters. To form a balanced view, readers should follow a few key data points and policy developments. Department of Energy deployment data, tracking real-time figures on wind, solar, and battery storage installations will reveal whether tariff-related cost increases are impeding new projects. ITC and WTO filings, decisions or disputes filed with the U.S. International Trade Commission, ITC, and the World Trade Organization, WTO, can illuminate the scope and precise nature of new tariffs. Inflation Reduction Act implementation. The IRA includes substantial incentives for clean energy. Observing whether these incentives counterbalance or overshadow the impact of tariffs is critical. EU and China's policy adjustments. Any new European Union subsidy packages or Chinese technology export policies could shift the investment landscape further. Corporate lobbying disclosures. Lobbying by legacy energy industries, steel producers, or renewable manufacturers will signal which direction trade and energy policy might tilt next. Conclusion. A call for nuance and accountability. Trump's proposed tariffs bring to the forefront an age-old tension, balancing domestic economic protection with the urgent need to address climate change. While alarmist headlines warn of an exodus of investors, historical precedent shows the clean energy sector's capacity to adapt. Yet this is no guarantee of an optimal outcome. If tariffs unintentionally hamper U.S. renewable growth at a pivotal moment, it could stall progress on climate goals while allowing rival economies to seize leadership in clean technology. The deeper lesson is that energy markets, particularly renewables, are global, interconnected, and influenced by factors ranging from corporate lobbying to supply chain realities. A single policy can reverberate across continents, shaping not only investment decisions but also the pace at which the world transitions away from fossil fuels. Readers, policymakers, and industry leaders alike must scrutinize the evidence, question assumptions, and recognize that trade policy is not an isolated economic lever. How we deploy it can either bolster climate action or derail it, potentially affecting our collective future in ways that transcend any single nation's borders. If clarity matters to you, stay with NovaDigest. Subscribe, share, and explore insights that go beyond the headlines, smart, balanced, and made for minds that question more.